9:47 a.m. U.S. Air Force F-16 from the 421st Fighter Squadron cuts across the sky over the Red Sea, flying top cover for a naval task force steaming near the coast of Yemen. Below, hidden in the hills of Hodeidah, the SA-6 missile system powers up, locked in within seconds. Two missiles scream off the rails, traveling at nearly 3 times the speed of sound. The F-16 radar lights up. The pilot reacts instantly, flares countermeasures, and a high-speed dive from 30,000 feet to 15,000 feet. One wrong move, and this turns into a headline. But the missiles miss, and that's when everything changes. At exactly 9:47 a.m. local time over the Red Sea, 2 missiles streaked through the sky launched by Houthi rebels from Yemen. Their target, a U.S. F-16 fighter jet and a nearby MQ-9 Reaper drone flying a routine patrol. But something went wrong. The missiles missed both of them. What followed wasn't a technical failure. It triggered a military response. The Houthis weren't ready for him. This wasn't the first time the Houthis had taken aim at U.S. assets, but this time they went for a high-value jet and failed. Within hours, American forces launched a response that sent a clear message across the region. The skies over the Red Sea are no longer just a hot zone. They've become a turning point in the Middle East conflict. Why would the Houthis go after a U.S. jet now? Was this a signal to Washington or a mistake they'll regret? And how did the U.S. military strike back? The U.S. Central Command immediately confirmed the incident, stating a U.S. fighter jet and an MQ-9 drone were engaged by surface-to-air missiles launched from Houthi positions. Both aircraft evaded the attack and returned safely to base. What stood out wasn't just that the attack failed, but that it happened at all. The Houthis had clearly acquired the capability and the confidence to engage one of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. The question now wasn't how they did it, but why. Military experts quickly weighed in. The missiles were believed to be Iranian-made, possibly modified versions of the Syed or Rad series designed to lock onto high-speed aerial targets. Until now, most Houthi strikes have been aimed at Saudi targets, commercial tankers, and occasionally unmanned drones. But firing directly at a U.S. fighter jets, that was a calculated risk and a dangerous one. Within hours, U.S. Navy warships in the region were placed on high alert. F-18s were scrambled from the nearest carrier group, and reconnaissance intensified across the Yemeni coastline. More importantly, the failed attack gave the U.S. military a clear green light to respond. Back at the scene of the attempted strike, analysts began piecing together the timeline. The missiles were launched from a mountainous area near Sada, a known Houthi stronghold and key logistics hub. Launch platforms were believed to be mobile, likely moved immediately after the attempt. U.S. satellites picked up the heat signatures and trajectory paths within seconds, allowing rapid confirmation and a window of retaliation. The MQ-9 Reaper, equipped with high-definition cameras, reportedly captured key footage of the missile plume and launch flash evidence that would be critical for the Pentagon's operational briefing later that day. But here's where things took a surprising turn. Instead of waiting days to respond through diplomatic channels or indirect action, the U.S. moved fast. By sunset, American forces had launched precision strikes on suspected missile launchers and Houthi radar stations in northern Yemen. The strikes were carried out by naval cruise missiles and possibly by F-18s flying combat air patrol from the nearby carrier group. Targets were neutralized, according to initial reports. This wasn't just retaliation. It was a statement. For months, the Houthis have been growing bolder, threatening shipping lanes and testing red lines. This time, they targeted the wrong aircraft. Not only did they miss, but they gave the U.S. military the justification it needed to up the pressure in a very public way. This failed missile strike instantly became one of the most serious escalations in the Red Sea since the beginning of the regional naval deployments. And now the stakes are even higher than ever. What do you think? Was this a desperate show of power from the Houthis, or a calculated move to provoke the U.S. into deeper conflict? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The moment the missiles missed their targets, their response wasn't delayed. Not by hours, not by even minutes. Inside the U.S. Navy's operations under aboard the USS Dwight Eisenhower, the radio chatter changed instantly. The attempted hit on an American fighter jet, combined with the drone in the area, flipped the mission from surveillance to active defense. Within minutes, fighter jets were rerouted, electronic warfare systems activated, and strike packages assembled. The message from the Pentagon to Central Command was clear. This could not go unanswered. By noon, the U.S. Navy had locked in coordinates from satellite and drone footage, specifically the launch zone near Yemen's Sada province. This region has long been a Houthi stronghold, fortified with mobile missile launchers, radar systems, and drone production sites, all heavily protected and often moved to avoid strikes. But this time they got caught. At approximately 4:20 p.m. local time, Tomahawk cruise missiles were launched from destroyers positioned in the Red Sea. Simultaneously, U.S. Air Force jets from an undisclosed base in the region struck down known radar positions believed to have tracked the F-16. Reports confirmed that the strikes were successful and proportionate, targeting only military assets directly linked to the attempted missile launch. Earlier that day, in the official statement that followed, U.S. Central Command stated U.S. forces conducted precision strikes on the missile infrastructure in northern Yemen. These strikes were in direct response to a failed missile attack on a U.S. aircraft operating in international airspace. This marked a turning point in the U.S. military's posture in the region. Until now, responses to Houthi aggression had largely been defensive, intercepting missiles and drones, escorting commercial vessels, or issuing diplomatic warnings. But the attempted hit on a crewed jet changed the rules. The U.S. Navy has also began repositioning warships in the region. The Eisenhower Carrier Strike Group moved closer to the Yemeni coastline, and destroyers like the USS La Boone and USS Mason were rerouted to create overlapping missile defense zones on board. Crews were briefed that the threat level had increased and that they could expect further hostile action. The attacks continued for the next several days. There were no additional Houthi missile launches at U.S. military assets. Instead, chatter intercepted by U.S. intelligence indicated confusion and internal debate among Houthi leadership about the wisdom of directly targeting American jets. The lesson was clear. The Houthis attacked the wrong aircraft, and it triggered a new phase in the conflict, one that the U.S. was now leading on its own terms. So why was attacking U.S. fighter jets such a massive mistake for the Houthis? Because it changed the rules of the game instantly. Until now, the Houthis had mostly limited their attacks to commercial shipping lanes and unmanned aerial vehicles. These provocations, while serious, gave the group a level of plausible deniability and political wiggle room. But by targeting a fully armed crewed U.S. F-16, they crossed a very specific line. They declared open hostility toward the U.S. military, that to fight they were not built to win. Let's be clear here. Houthi forces are not an untrained militia hiding in the hills. They are battle-hardened, heavily armed, and have advanced Iranian technology at their disposal. They successfully hit tankers, taken down drones, and disrupted global shipping in the Red Sea. But attacking a U.S. warplane changes the stakes completely. First, they lose the moral high ground they often rely on in global media narratives. Striking a commercial vessel brings global sympathy and calls for ceasefires. But firing on a U.S. jet, that's an act of war. And that justifies everything that came after the retaliatory strikes. The expanded military presence and the potential for full-on escalation. Second, they underestimated the U.S. response time. Unlike the slow diplomatic gears that turn after a drone hit or a missile splashing near a cargo ship, a threat to American lives kicks in a different kind of machine. The military doesn't ask questions. It moves fast and with precision. Third, the attempted attack gave the U.S. a very public justification to intensify operations in Yemen and the surrounding waters. Up to that point, U.S. strikes were criticized in international circles for being overly aggressive or risking escalation. Now, not so much. The Houthis handed Washington the narrative it needed. We were attacked first. There's also a strategic miscalculation here. The Houthis likely intended to send a message that they could reach U.S. jets and would no longer be passive players. But instead, they exposed their own vulnerabilities. The failed strike revealed missile launch points, radar locations, and infrastructure that the U.S. quickly mapped and destroyed. In military terms, the move gave more away than it gained. And finally, they've now made themselves a direct priority for CENTCOM. It's no longer just about shipping protection or coalition diplomacy. The U.S. has likely placed high-value Houthi military leaders and installations on their strike. That, if seen lists, that changes day-to-day life for the Houthis on the ground. Command centers move underground, launch crews, sleep in shifts, and their communications become more paranoid. In short, by going after the wrong jet and missing the Houthis gave the U.S. military exactly what it needed: justification, intel, and the green light. And now the skies over Yemen look a lot more hostile than they did before February 19th. That single miscalculated missile launch didn't just trigger an American counterstrike. It cracked open a broader front in Yemen that's now shifting by the day. Following the failed attack, U.S. military operations inside Yemen intensified within 48 hours. Satellite surveillance over northern Yemen showed increased activity near the command centers, airfields, and suspected missile storage sites. The Trump administration made it clear the U.S. would take all necessary actions to defend its forces and assets in the region. That meant more drones in the air, more warships in the Red Sea, and more boots, at least temporarily stationed at strategic points in the Gulf. But the situation in Yemen itself is more complicated than just a tit-for-tat military campaign. One of the biggest changes, though, is a shift in how the U.S. views deterrence. Previously, much of the strategy focused on avoiding escalation, limiting responses to defensive strikes. That posture is now gone. The message from Washington is simple: if you target American forces, we will not just defend. We will strike first and strike harder. In other words, F around and find out. So far, that message appears to be having an effect. Houthi launches against U.S. targets have slowed, and intercepted communications suggest a growing fear among commanders about becoming targets themselves. But this new strategy carries risks. One wrong strike, especially if civilian areas are effective, could spark international backlash or even push Yemen further into chaos. Still, for now, the Trump administration seems committed to showing strength and restoring deterrence. Whether that will keep U.S. forces safe long-term or pull them deeper into conflict remains to be seen. The moment that the news broke that the Houthis had fired missiles at a U.S. F-16 and missed, the international community responded quickly. But once the U.S. retaliated with force, the world really started to pay attention. America's closest allies, including the UK, France, and Germany, issued strong statements backing the U.S. response. The British Ministry of Defense said, "We stand firmly with our U.S. partners in defending freedom of navigation and deterring hostile aggression in the Red Sea." France echoed the sentiment and promised additional naval support in the area as part of Operation Speeds. The United Nations called for maximum restraint. But many diplomats admitted behind closed doors that the U.S. had every right to respond the way it did. Even NATO's leadership released a statement noting the reckless escalation by Houthi militants and warned of severe consequences if such attacks continued. Now Yemen is once again on the edge. The Red Sea is a flashpoint.u.s. Forces are on high alert and global trade routes hang in the balance. And the world is watching closely because one more wrong move could ignite something much bigger.